The wedding hall glimmered with chandeliers, their golden light falling upon tables dressed in white silk and crystal glassware. The guests were buzzing, not with excitement, but with curiosity. For beneath all the laughter, the music, and the clinking of champagne glasses, there was one topic stirring whispers. Why had Michael, the wealthy groom, invited his ex-wife Clara? Michael had orchestrated the moment with cruel precision. To him, the thought of her arriving in some faded dress, clutching her worn handbag, surrounded by the glittering elite, was the perfect humiliation. He wanted her to see what she had lost, his wealth, his mansion, his influence, and now his beautiful young bride, Anna. But as the grand doors of the hall opened, the entire crowd fell silent. Heads turned, mouths dropped. Even the violinist missed his note. Clara didn't walk in timidly, nor did she wear the humble attire Michael had envisioned. Instead, she stepped out of a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom parked at the entrance, her heels striking the marble with quiet confidence. She was stunning, dressed in a gown that shimmered like starlight, her elegance commanding the entire room. On either side of her, 3 little children, identical triplets, walked hand in hand, each wearing custom-tailored suits. Their wide eyes and innocent smiles added an air of mystery, drawing every gaze toward them. Clara carried herself like royalty, her posture unbending, her aura unshaken. Michael's smirk faltered. His glass of champagne trembled in his hand as the whispers grew louder. "Is that his ex-wife?" someone gasped. "She's more beautiful than the bride," murmured another. "And those children, whose are they?" Anna, radiant in her ivory wedding gown, noticed the sudden shift. The crowd wasn't looking at her anymore. Their admiration, their astonishment, all of it now belonged to Clara. Clara met Michael's stunned gaze with a cool smile, her eyes neither bitter nor meek, but filled with a calm power that unsettled him. She walked past the rows of astonished guests, her children close by, each step echoing louder than the music. When she finally reached the front, just a few feet from Michael and Anna, she paused. The silence in the hall was deafening. Michael, desperate to regain control, forced a laugh. Well, Clara, I didn't think you'd actually come. And what's this? You've brought company?" Clara tilted her head slightly, her smile never fading. "You invited me, Michael. Surely you didn't expect me to arrive unnoticed. And these," she gently touched the shoulders of the 3 children beside her, "are not just company. They are my pride, my joy, and my greatest treasure." The guests leaned forward, holding their breath. Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask a question burning in everyone's mind, but something in Clara's composure warned him against it. Still, his pride pushed him forward. "And their father?" he asked, his voice louder than intended, trying to mask his unease. Clara's eyes glimmered as she responded, her voice carrying across the hall like music. "Their father is a man who knows how to value love, loyalty, and sacrifice. A man who doesn't measure worth by wealth or power. A man very different from the one standing before me today." Gasps erupted through the crowd. Anna's hand tightened around Michael's arm, her smile cracking. The bride's family exchanged worried glances, sensing the shift in energy. Michael's mind raced. He had imagined Clara walking in as a broken woman, pitted by the elite. Instead, she had stolen the stage, transforming his day of triumph into a storm of whispers that threatened to swallow him whole. Clara gracefully turned to leave, her children's hands still in hers, when an older gentleman in an impeccable suit stood from the crowd. His presence commanded instant respect. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, and exuding quiet authority, he stepped forward and bowed slightly to Clara. "Forgive my interruption," he said, his voice steady, "but the world deserves to know the truth. Clara is not merely the ex-wife of this man. She is my daughter-in-law. And those children, my grandchildren." The crowd gasped again, louder this time, as the weight of his words settled in. Michael's face drained of color. The man speaker was none other than Richard Lancaster, one of the most powerful business magnates in the country, a man Michael had tried and failed to court for years. And now, Clara stood beside him, not as a forgotten ex-wife, but as a cherished member of his family. The hall was no longer Michael's stage. It belonged entirely to Clara. The whispers turned into open admiration. the crowd drawn to her resilience, her transformation, her grace under fire. And yet, there was still more to unfold, for Clara had not come only to show her strength. She had come with a purpose, one that would shake the very foundations of Michael's carefully built world. As the murmurs rippled like waves across the grand hall, Clara held her ground with the poise of a queen. Her triplets clung to her dress, their innocent eyes scanning the sea of unfamiliar faces. Yet they carried the same unshakable dignity as their mother. Richard Lancaster placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder, his gaze sweeping the room like a silent warning, daring anyone to question her worth. Michael's pride burned, his teeth clenched as though they might shatter. This was supposed to be his day, his redemption, his declaration that he had risen above the woman who once shared his life. He had imagined her crumbling under the weight of his success, reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale in front of the world. Yet here she stood, not just as equal, but as better, armored by a power no wealth of his could ever purchase: respect. The orchestra faltered before quickly regaining rhythm. Yet it was too late. The atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The bride, Anna, felt it in the pit of her stomach. She could see the shift in the eyes of their guests: admiration for Clara, doubt for Michael, and pity for herself. She had thought this day would bind her greatness, but instead, it tied her to a scandal unraveling in real time. Michael cleared his throat, desperate to reclaim his audience. "Richard," he began, his voice straining under for civility, "this is highly unexpected. But let's not forget, Clara and I divorced years ago. Our lives took separate paths. She doesn't belong here anymore." Richard's cold glare cut through him like a blade. "On the contrary, Michael, Clara will always belong where integrity is valued. And from what I see today, integrity is sorely lacking here." The word struck deeper than Michael expected, and laughter, low but audible, spread from the corners of the room. The wealthy thrive on perception, and the perception now was clear. Michael had overplayed his hand. Clara remained calm, her smile steady, her eyes scanning the crowd. She knew the balance of power had shifted, but she was not here for petty vengeance. Every step she had taken into this hall carried intention. She had chosen this gown, this car, even the entrance with her children, not to flaunt wealth, but to show the world that dignity survives even in the ashes of betrayal. "Michael," she said softly, though her words traveled like thunder, "when you left me, I had nothing. No home, no support, no place to hide. But I found strength in places you never looked, in compassion, in perseverance, and in the love that came to me when I least expected it. You thought you destroyed me, but you forged me. And today, I stand not to disrupt your wedding, but to remind you that the woman you tried to bury has grown roots too deep to be shaken." A hushed awe blanketed the hall. Anna, her hands trembling, felt her throat tighten. She glanced at Michael, whose fists clenched at his sides, veins bulging in his temples. He wanted to lash out, to break Clara's composure, but every word he could think of would expose more of his pettiness. One of the children, the boldest of the triplets, tugged at Clara's gown and looked up at Michael. "Mama, is this the man who made you cry?" he asked innocently, his voice carrying farther than intended. Gasps erupted like fireworks. Michael's chest heaved, but Clara bent down gently, brushing her son's hair back with tender fingers. "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her tone neither bitter nor weak. "But he also taught me to be strong, and because of that I am grateful. It was a masterstroke. Her refusal to smear him, her choice instead to turn pain into gratitude, only deepened her grace in the eyes of the crowd." The applause began slowly, just a few hands clapping in admiration, before spreading like fire through the room. Michael felt the ground beneath him crumble. Applause for her. Admiration for her. His bride's family shifted uncomfortably, their smiles gone, their faith in this union shaken. Richard raised his hand, silencing the room once more. "Let's be clear," he said firmly. "My son married Clara not because of wealth, but because he saw in her the kind of character most men only dream of finding. These children are heirs not just to my fortune, but to values money cannot buy. And as for you, Michael, whatever empire you believe you've built is nothing but sand if it lacks honor. The sting of those words cut deeper than any wound Michael had ever endured. His reputation, the one he had meticulously constructed, was unraveling thread by thread in front of the very people whose approval he craved most. Anna stepped forward, her voice small but trembling with urgency. "Michael," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me she was like this? You said she was nothing, that she was weak." Michael's silence was an admission in itself. He couldn't speak, couldn't explain, for every word would betray his scheme. He had not just lied to Anna, he had underestimated the very person he thought he had destroyed. Clara, seeing the bride's distress, walked closer, her children following like shadows. She looked Anna in the eye, her tone unexpectedly gentle. "You are not my enemy. You are another woman who deserves to know the truth of the man you are marrying. Choose wisely, Anna. A wedding is not the foundation of happiness if it is built on deception." Anna's eyes brimmed with tears. The room seemed to tilt around her, the weight of the revelation pressing against her chest. She turned her gaze to Michael, seeking reassurance, but found only the cold mass of a man cornered by his own schemes. The triplets, sensing the tension, leaned into their mother, and Clara wrapped her arms around them, her presence both shield and sword. She had not raised her voice, not hurled accusations, not descended to the level of bitterness. Instead, she had held a mirror to Michael's face, showing him not the reflection he wanted, but the truth he could not escape. The hall erupted again, not with applause this time, but with voices. Guests spoke openly, their whispers swelling into a tide of judgment. How could he treat her so? She's stronger than he'll ever be. What a fool to let her go. And through it all, Clara stood tall, her children anchoring her, Richard by her side, the embodiment of resilience forged from betrayal. Yet deep inside her heart, she knew the night was not finished. There was more to reveal, more to say, and more to prove, for she had come not just to stand, but to turn the tables of destiny itself. The voices in the hall rose like a storm, crashing and colliding, pulling Michael into a whirlpool of humiliation. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every stifled chuckle scraped against his ego like shards of glass. He had dreamed of this moment for months. The moment he would prove to the world that he had moved on from Clara, that he had risen to heights she could never reach. Instead, his carefully constructed illusion was crumbling, and in its place stood the woman he had tried so hard to bury, shining brighter than ever. Clara held her ground, one hand resting protectively on her children's shoulders. She could feel their tiny hearts beating fast, could sense their confusion at the tension flooding the hall. But she knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about showing them what strength looked like, about teaching them that grace can cut deeper than cruelty. Michael raised his hand as though to quiet the crowd, but his voice betrayed him, trembling with desperation. "Enough," he barked, his words sharper than he intended. "This is my wedding, my day, not hers." But his protest only deepened the disdain in the eyes of his guests. His words rang hollow, brittle, like glass about to shatter. The wealthy and powerful around him, those whose respect he craved more than breath, were not impressed by displays of anger. They were impressed by composure, by power-born control, by the ability to rise above. And Clara had embodied all of it with every word she had spoken, every step she had taken into that hall. Anna stepped back, her face pale. She no longer saw a husband to be standing beside her, but a stranger, petty, insecure, and consumed by pride. She thought of the warnings she had ignored, of the stories she had brushed aside when Michael painted Clara as weak and bitter. But now she stood in front of living proof that the opposite was true. Clara was neither weak nor bitter. She was radiant with dignity, and Michael's cruelty had forged her into someone unstoppable. "Michael," Anna said at last, her voice breaking the silence that had spread, "you told me she was broken, that she was bitter, insignificant. But look at her. She is stronger than both of us combined. And you have deceived not just me, but yourself." Her words echoed, each syllable striking harder than the last. Guests shifted in their seats, some nodding, some whispering, but all watching the bride with rapt attention. Anna's veil trembled as her hands shook, and in that trembling was the dawning of truth. She could not tie her life to a man who built his world on the ruins of others. I cannot marry a man who seeks to destroy what he once vowed to protect, Anna whispered, pulling her hand from Michael's grasp. The gasp that tore through the hall was like thunder. In that single act, the wedding crumbled. Michael's jaw locked. He reached out, but Anna stepped back, her eyes filled with tears of both anger and liberation. She turned, and though her gown trailed like waves of silk, her steps were unyielding. The bride walked away. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stood frozen, stripped of everything he had tried to display, his bride, his pride, his triumph. And across from him stood Clara, who had taken nothing yet walked away with everything. Richard Lancaster stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. Power without honor is nothing. Today has proven that wealth can dazzle for a moment, but character endures forever. Clara, my dear, you have shown the world what resilience looks like. And you, he turned his gaze to Michael, have shown us all what weakness truly is. The guests, powerful men and women who could make or break fortunes with a word, began to rise to their feet. At first, it was only a few, then more, and soon, the entire hall erupted in applause. Not the shallow clapping reserved for speeches, but thunderous, rolling ovation that shook the chandeliers above. Clara's eyes glistened, but she did not break her composure. She bowed her head slightly in gratitude, then lifted her chin again, strong and unyielding. The triplets, caught in the moment, clapped their tiny hands too, their laughter bubbling through the tension, transforming what could have been chaos into a scene of triumph. Michael, red with rage, stormed down the aisle, shoving past guests, his voice lost beneath the applause. His footsteps echoed with the fury of a man who had lost everything. His reputation, his marriage, and his carefully built facade. He left behind not victory, but disgrace. When the doors slammed shut behind him, the applause swelled once more, this time not just for Clara, but for the story she had written with her life. A story of betrayal turned into strength, of pain transformed into power. Clara knelt to her children, gathering them close. She kissed their foreheads, her tears falling freely now, not of sorrow but pride. "Remember this moment," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Remember that no one could decide your worth but you. The world will try to break you, but if you hold on to love, if you hold on to truth, you will rise. Always." Richard bent down, his strong arms wrapping around his grandchildren, his eyes soft as he looked at Clara. "You've honored our family more than wealth ever could. Today, you've written a legacy for them that will outlive all of us." The guests began approaching, men and women who moments ago had dismissed her, now extending hands of respect, bowing their heads, congratulating her not for revenge, but for her strength. She accepted their words with humility, never gloating, never forgetting that true victory is quiet. The orchestra, sensing the shift, began to play, not the triumphant march meant for Michael's wedding, but a softer melody, one that carried the weight of grace and new beginnings. The notes wrapped around Clara and her children, lifting them as though the very universe applauded their journey. And in that hall, under the glow of chandeliers and the watchful eyes of those who once doubted her, Clara stood transformed, not as a discarded wife of a man who had tried to break her, but as a woman who had risen from the ashes of betrayal into the radiance of victory. The Rolls-Royce waited outside, its polished frame reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Clara took her children's hands, her gown trailing like a river of stars behind her. As she stepped out of the hall, applause still echoing within, the world outside seemed to pause, the air itself charged with the weight of what had just unfolded. She had come into that wedding not to beg, not to fight, not to humiliate, but to stand in her truth. And in doing so, she had turned disgrace into glory, weakness into strength, and betrayal into the greatest triumph of all. As the Rolls-Royce door closed behind her, Clara looked out the window, her children's laughter filling the car, her heart steady. The city stretched before her, alive with endless possibilities. She knew the road ahead would not always be smooth, but she also knew one unshakable truth. She had already won the greatest battle, not against Michael, not against society, but against the part of herself that once believed she was nothing. The car rolled forward, carrying her into a future unbound by her past, and behind her, in the fading echoes of a wedding-turned spectacle, remained a lesson that every guest, every onlooker, every listener would carry forever. True power does not lie in wealth or titles. True power is rising when the world tries to bury you.